The blood-red sunset cast long shadows across the dusty main street of Whispering Creek as Caleb Turner stood alone at the freshly dug grave, his infant daughter wailing in his arms like a wounded coyote. The tiny bundle, barely 6 days old, had no way of understanding that her mother would never hold her again, while Caleb himself could barely comprehend the cruel twist of fate that had taken his beloved wife Sarah from childbed fever just days after giving birth to their first child. "Hush now, little one," he whispered, his voice cracking as he awkwardly tried to rock her in his arms. The baby only cried louder, her face scrunched and reddened, tiny fists batting the air. Caleb looked down at her helplessly, the grief and exhaustion of the past week etched deep in the lines of his face. It was 1876, and the Montana Territory offered little mercy to a widower with an infant. As the town's blacksmith, Caleb had responsibilities to the community. Horses needed shoeing, wagon wheels needed mending, and life continued its relentless pace even as his own world had shattered. But how could he tend the forge with a newborn? How could he possibly raise a child alone? The funeral had been brief, attended by most of the town's residents. Now they'd gone back to their lives, leaving Caleb to face the crushing reality of his new existence. His daughter Sarah had wanted to name her Emma. Continued her plaintive cries as he turned away from the grave. "Mr. Turner," a soft voice called from behind him. He turned to find Madeline Lewis standing a respectful distance away. The schoolteacher had arrived in Whispering Creek only 3 months ago from Boston, bringing her refined Eastern manners and education to their rough frontier town. She was younger than most schoolmarms, perhaps 25 to 30 years, with auburn hair tucked neatly beneath her bonnet and kind eyes that reflected the same sunset that painted the sky. "Miss Lewis," he acknowledged with a weary nod. "Forgive me if I don't stand on ceremony." "Of course," she said, stepping closer. I couldn't help but notice that Emma seems quite distressed." Caleb looked down at his daughter, still crying despite his awkward attempts to comfort her. "She hasn't stopped since." He couldn't finish the sentence. Madeline approached cautiously. "May I?" she asked, extending her arms. Too exhausted to refuse, Caleb carefully transferred his daughter to the schoolteacher's waiting arms. The transformation was immediate and startling. Madeline cradled the infant with practiced ease, tucking her securely against her shoulder and patting her back in a gentle rhythm while humming a soft lullaby. Within moments, Emma's cries diminished to whimpers, then to the occasional hiccup. "How did you do that?" Caleb asked, astonishment momentarily displacing his grief. "I helped raise my younger siblings after my mother passed," she explained. 5 of them, in fact. The youngest was just a baby. She smiled down at Emma, who was now blinking drowsily. "She's hungry, Mr. Turner. When was the last time she was fed?" Caleb ran a hand through his dark hair, leaving it standing on end. I'm not rightly sure. Mrs. Daniels from the general store has been helping with a bottle, but she has her own children to mind, and I've been trying to manage on my own today, what with the funeral and all." Madeline nodded in understanding. "You need help, Mr. Turner. More help than the occasional kindness of neighbors." "I'll manage," he said stiffly, pride rising through his exhaustion. "Will you?" she asked quietly, not unkindly. "Can you work your forge and care for an infant? Can you prepare her bottles and wash her linens and still earn enough to keep a roof over both your heads?" Her directness stunned him into silence. In the past week, he'd been so consumed by grief that he'd barely thought beyond the next hour. "I have a proposition," Madeline continued, gently swaying with Emma. "I'll help you care for your daughter. I can come by before and after school and on weekends. I can show you how to tend to her needs properly." "Why would you do that?" Caleb asked suspiciously. In his experience, people rarely offered help without expecting something in return. "Because this child deserves a chance," she said simply. "And because Sarah was kind to me when I first arrived in town. She made me feel welcome when others were." less enthusiastic about a woman from the East teaching their children. Caleb remembered how Sarah had defended the new schoolteacher when some of the more traditional townsfolk had questioned whether a young, unmarried woman from Boston could possibly understand the needs of frontier children. "I can't pay you much," he said finally. "I'm not asking for payment." She hesitated. "Though I wouldn't refuse a hot meal now and then." Despite everything, a ghost of a smile touched Caleb's lips. "I reckon I can manage that, though I warn you my cooking skills are limited to beans and coffee strong enough to stand a spoon in." "Then perhaps I can teach you a few things about cooking as well," she replied with a small smile of her own. As they walked back toward town, the baby now peaceful in Madeline's arms, Caleb felt the first faint stirring of hope since the doctor had emerged from his bedroom with the news that had destroyed his world. By the time they reached Caleb's modest home at the edge of town, Emma was sound asleep. The house stood beside his blacksmith shop, a simple two-room structure that had once felt cozy and was now a repository of painful memories. Sarah's shawl still hung by the door. Her favorite teacup sat unwashed on the table where she'd last used it. Madeline took in the state of the home with a quick, assessing glance but made no comment. Instead, she instructed Caleb on how to prepare a bottle using the cow's milk he had stored in the spring house. "You need to dilute it slightly for a newborn," she explained, showing him how to mix the milk with boiled water and a small amount of sugar. "And always test it on your wrist before giving it to her." When Emma awoke and began to fuss again, Madeline demonstrated how to hold her properly for feeding. Caleb watched, absorbing every detail, his large, calloused hands looking impossibly rough next to his daughter's delicate form. "Would you like to try?" Madeline asked, offering him the bottle. Caleb hesitated. "My hands. They're not meant for such gentle work." "Nonsense," she said firmly. "They're her father's hands. She'll know them anywhere." With tremendous care, Caleb took his daughter back into his arms, arranging her as Madeline had shown him. The bottle looked absurdly small in his blacksmith's grip, but he managed to position it correctly. When Emma began to suckle, a look of wonder crossed his face. "There," Madeline said softly. "You see? You can do this." As darkness fell fully outside, Madeline helped Caleb establish a semblance of order in the house. She showed him how to properly swaddle Emma, explain the signs of different cries, and arranged the baby's makeshift cradle-a-drawer from Sarah's dresser lined with soft blankets next to his bed. "I'll return in the morning before school," she promised as she prepared to leave. "And I'll bring some proper baby clothes. Mrs. Parker just had twins, and I'm sure she has extras she'd be willing to share." Caleb stood awkwardly at the door, Emma sleeping in his arms. "I don't rightly know how to thank you, Miss Lewis." "Madeline, please." "And there's no need for thanks. Just take care of her tonight, and remember what I showed you." She paused, then added gently, "And remember to take care of yourself as well, Mr. Turner. Emma needs you strong." "Caleb," he offered in return. "If we're to be working together on this, you might as well use my given name." She nodded, a smile touching her lips. "Good night then, Caleb. I'll see you both at dawn." True to her word, Madeline arrived as the first light was breaking over the eastern hills. She found Caleb pacing the floor with Emma, both of them looking equally exhausted. "She wouldn't settle," he explained, his voice rough with fatigue. "Every time I put her down, she started wailing again." "That's perfectly normal," Madeline assured him, taking the baby and checking her diaper. "She's probably feeling unsettled with all the changes." She demonstrated how to properly change and clean the infant, explaining each step as she went. Before leaving for school, Madeline prepared several bottles and stored them in the coolest part of the house. She also wrote out detailed instructions for Caleb to follow throughout the day. "I've arranged for Mrs. Daniels to check on you at midday," she told him, "and I'll return as soon as school is dismissed." "I should be working," Caleb said, gesturing toward his silent forge. "I've orders to fill, and we need the money." Madeline considered this. Perhaps you could work while Emma naps. And maybe bring her cradle to the shop, so you can keep an eye on her when she's sleeping. The arrangement proved more challenging than either of them anticipated. Emma seemed to sense whenever Caleb approached the forge, waking from sound sleep to demand attention the moment metal touched the fire. By the time Madeline returned in the afternoon, Caleb had completed only a fraction of his usual work and was at his wit's end. "This can't continue," he said as Madeline took Emma from him. "I need to work, and she needs more care than I can give her." "Give it time," Madeline encouraged. "It's only been one day. We'll find a rhythm that works for both of you." But after 3 days of the same struggle, Caleb was no closer to balancing his responsibilities. Madeline had practically moved into his home, arriving before dawn and leaving well after dark, exhausted herself from teaching all day and then helping with Emma all evening. On the 4th night, as they sat at his kitchen table sharing a simple meal Madeline had prepared, Caleb finally gave voice to the thought that had been plaguing him. "Perhaps I should give her up," he said quietly, not meeting Madeline's eyes. "Find a good family who can give her a proper mother and father. Someone better suited to raising a child than a rough blacksmith." Madeline set down her fork, her expression troubled. "Is that truly what you want?" "What I want?" Caleb laughed bitterly. "What I want is my wife back. What I want is impossible." "Emma isn't impossible," Madeline said softly. "She's right there in that cradle, and she needs you. She needs someone who knows what they're doing. Someone like you." He finally looked up at her. "You're a natural with her. Any fool can see that. I've had practice, that's all. You're learning quickly, Caleb. I've seen how gentle you are with her, how attentive you're becoming to her needs. It's not enough. I can't work enough to support us both, and I can't care for her properly when I do work." He ran a hand over his face. "And I can't keep imposing on your kindness indefinitely." Madeline was quiet for a long moment. What if there was another arrangement? She finally asked, her voice careful. "What kind of arrangement?" "A more permanent one." She took a deep breath. "What if I moved in here? Properly, I mean." Caleb stared at her in shock. "That would be highly improper. People would talk." "People always talk," she said with a slight shrug. "But they'd talk more if the town blacksmith gave away his only child because he couldn't manage on his own." "You're suggesting—" "What exactly?" "A marriage of convenience," Madeline said plainly. "Emma needs a mother. You need help." She hesitated. "I've grown quite attached to her already. And to be frank, teaching pays poorly, and the room above the schoolhouse is drafty and lonely." "You'd marry me just for room and board?" Caleb asked incredulously. "I'd marry you to give Emma a chance at a proper upbringing," she corrected. "The other benefits would be practical considerations." Caleb shook his head. "You deserve better than a loveless marriage to a grieving widower, Madeline." "Perhaps. But I'm practical enough to know that options for unmarried schoolteachers are limited, especially out here." She smiled slightly. "And I'm not entirely selfless in this. I've always wanted children of my own." Before Caleb could respond, Emma began to fuss in her cradle. Madeline rose to tend to her, lifting the baby with practiced ease and cradling her close. The sight of them together, Madeline humming softly to his daughter, Emma's tiny hand curled around Madeline's finger, stirred something in Caleb's chest that he hadn't expected to feel again so soon after Sarah's death. "Think about it," Madeline said quietly over her shoulder. "That's all I ask." For the next 2 weeks, they continued their arrangement without further discussion of Madeline's proposal. Caleb gradually became more confident in caring for Emma, though he still relied heavily on Madeline's guidance and help. The townspeople, initially sympathetic to Caleb's plight, began to gossip about the amount of time the schoolteacher spent at the widower's home. The situation came to a head when the school board chairman, Mr. Hollister, paid Madeline a visit at the schoolhouse one afternoon. "Miss Lewis," he began stiffly after dismissing the last student. "It has come to my attention that you have been spending an inappropriate amount of time in the company of Mr. Turner." "I've been helping him with his infant daughter," Madeline replied calmly, "as have several other women in town." "The other women aren't unmarried young ladies staying until all hours," Mr. Hollister pointed out. "We hired you to teach our children, not to play nursemaid to a widower." "What I do with my own time is hardly the school board's concern," Madeline said, her voice cooling. "It becomes our concern when it affects the moral example you set for our children," the man countered. "Several parents have expressed reservations about your arrangement with Mr. Turner." "I see." Madeline folded her hands in her lap. "And what would the board suggest I do? Allow an infant to suffer without proper care? That is Mr. Turner's problem to solve, not yours." Mr. Hollister cleared his throat uncomfortably. "The board feels that if this situation continues, we may need to reconsider your position for the coming term." After he left, Madeline sat at her desk for a long time, considering her options. When she arrived at Caleb's house that evening, she found him successfully feeding Emma while simultaneously preparing a simple stew for their dinner. "You're getting better at this," she observed, setting down her basket of supplies. Caleb looked up with a small smile of accomplishment. "She only fussed for an hour when Mrs. Daniels left today. That's an improvement over yesterday's 2 hours." Madeline hung her shawl by the door and came to take the wooden spoon from him, stirring the stew that was threatening to stick to the pot. "I had a visit from Mr. Hollister today," she said casually. Caleb's smile faded. "About us, I assume?" "Indeed. It seems the good people of Whispering Creek are concerned about my virtue." She kept her tone light, though there was an edge beneath it. "The board is reconsidering my position for next term." Caleb set the empty bottle down, shifting Emma to his shoulder to burp her as Madeline had taught him. "I'm sorry. I never meant to cause trouble for you." "You haven't," she assured him. "Small-minded gossips have." They ate dinner in companionable silence, taking turns holding Emma, who was unusually content that evening. As Madeline prepared to leave, Caleb finally spoke the words that had been on his mind since her proposal. "I've been thinking about what you suggested," he said, standing awkwardly by the door. "About marriage." Madeline paused in the act of tying her bonnet. "And I think it's a sensible solution," he said carefully. "But I need you to understand something first." "What's that?" "I loved Sarah deeply," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I can't promise you the kind of marriage you deserve, one based on love and passion. I can only offer you respect, protection, and partnership in raising Emma." "I'm not asking for love, Caleb," Madeline replied softly. "I'm asking for a chance to be a mother to Emma and to build a life here. Perhaps affection will grow in time. But I don't expect it, nor demand it."
"Then,
"If you're certain this is what you want, I would be honored to marry you, Madeline Lewis." The wedding took place the following Saturday, a simple ceremony performed by the town's minister with only a few witnesses present. The bride wore her best blue dress rather than white, in deference to Caleb's recent widowhood, and carried Emma rather than flowers. There was no celebration afterward. They simply returned to what was now their shared home. That evening, as Madeline prepared for bed in what had been Sarah's room, Caleb had insisted on moving his things to the small alcove off the kitchen. She heard Emma begin to cry. She found Caleb already at the cradle, lifting his daughter with more confidence than he'd shown just weeks earlier. "She's probably hungry," he said, looking up as Madeline entered in her nightgown and robe. "I'll prepare a bottle." "I'll take her," Madeline offered, holding out her arms. As she settled into the rocking chair by the stove with Emma, watching Caleb heat the milk with practiced movements, Madeline felt a strange sense of rightness. This wasn't the life she had imagined for herself when she'd left Boston for the frontier, but there was something undeniably satisfying about it. The first months of their marriage settled into a pattern. Madeline continued teaching while also caring for Emma and the household. Caleb worked his forge during the day and took responsibility for Emma in the evenings so Madeline could prepare lessons for the following day. They operated as partners, each with their designated responsibilities, their interactions polite but somewhat formal. They never spoke of Sarah, though her presence lingered in the house. Her clothes remained packed away in a trunk, her sewing basket untouched in the corner. Caleb kept a small portrait of her beside his bedroll in the kitchen alcove, and sometimes Madeline would find him looking at it when he thought she wasn't watching. As summer approached and school neared its end for the term, Emma began to change rapidly. At 4 months old, she was now smiling and cooing, responding to both Caleb and Madeline with evident delight. Her personality emerged stubborn like her father, Madeline often teased, but with a sunny disposition that must have come from her mother. One evening, as they sat on the small porch watching the sunset, Emma asleep in Madeline's arms, Caleb broke their comfortable silence. "You're good with her," he observed. "Better than I could have hoped for." "She makes it easy," Madeline replied, smiling down at the sleeping infant. "She's a wonderful baby." "I've been thinking," Caleb said hesitantly. "Now that school's nearly finished for the summer, perhaps you'd like to make some changes to the house. Make it more your own." Madeline looked up in surprise. "I wouldn't want to erase Sarah's presence," she said carefully. "You wouldn't be," he assured her. "Sarah. She would have wanted Emma to have a real home, not a shrine to what's been lost." He took a deep breath. "And I think she would have liked you, Madeline. You have her practical nature." It was the first time he'd spoken of Sarah directly to her, and Madeline recognized the significance of the moment. "Thank you for saying that," she said softly. "I wish I had known her better." Caleb nodded, his gaze distant. "She would have approved of our arrangement. She was never one for sentimentality when there was work to be done." "Is that why you married her?" Madeline asked, curious about the woman whose place she had so unexpectedly taken. A genuine smile crossed Caleb's face.
"No.
I married her because she was the only woman in 3 counties who could outride me and wasn't afraid to tell me when I was being a fool." His expression softened. "And because when she smiled, it felt like the sun coming out after a storm." Madeline felt an unexpected pang of envy for the love Sarah had known, but she pushed it aside. "She sounds remarkable." She was. Caleb looked at Emma, sleeping peacefully. "I see her in Emma sometimes. The shape of her eyes, the way she furrows her brow when she's concentrating." "She has your smile, though," Madeline observed. "And your stubbornness." Caleb laughed, the sound warm in the evening air. Poor child. As the summer progressed, the boundaries between them gradually softened. Caleb began joining Madeline and Emma for meals at the table rather than taking his plate to his workbench. Madeline found the courage to move some of Sarah's things to make room for her own. They began to talk more, sharing stories of their childhoods and discovering mutual interests they hadn't expected. The turning point came one hot August night when Emma, now 7 months old, developed a sudden fever. Madeline awoke to her distressed cries and found her flushed and burning with heat. "Caleb," she called, fear tightening her throat as she lifted the whimpering baby from her cradle. He appeared instantly, his hair rumpled from sleep, concern etching his features as he took in the situation. "She's burning up," Madeline said, her usual composure cracking. "I don't know what's wrong." Caleb touched Emma's forehead, his large hand gentle against her hot skin. "I'll get the doctor," he said decisively. "It's the middle of the night. I don't care if it's the middle of Judgment Day," he interrupted. "She needs help." While Caleb rode for the doctor, Madeline tried every remedy she knew: cool cloths on Emma's forehead, attempts to get her to drink, gentle rocking, and soothing words. By the time Caleb returned with the doctor, she was nearly frantic with worry.
Dr.
Wilson examined Emma thoroughly, his weathered face giving away nothing as he listened to her chest and checked her throat. Teething fever, most likely, he finally pronounced. Nasty business, but rarely dangerous. Keep her cool and try to get her to take fluids. The fever should break by morning. After he left, neither Caleb nor Madeline could bear to leave Emma's side. They sat together beside her cradle, taking turns applying cool cloths to her feverish body and offering sips of water. In the darkest hours of the night, when Emma's cries were at their most pitiful, Madeline found herself weeping silently. "What if she gets worse?" she whispered to Caleb. "What if the doctor is wrong?" Caleb, who had been watching her with Emma for months now, who had seen the devotion and love she showed his daughter every day, reached out and took her hand. "She's strong," he said firmly. "Like her mother." He paused, then added softly, "Both her mothers." Madeline looked up at him through her tears, startled by his words. "You think of me as her mother?" "You are her mother, Madeline," he said simply. "In every way that matters." The fever broke just before dawn, as the doctor had predicted. Emma's flushed skin cooled, and she finally fell into a peaceful sleep. Exhausted, Madeline leaned against Caleb's shoulder, his arm around her providing unexpected comfort. "Thank you," he murmured into her hair, "for loving her so well." "How could I not?" she answered truthfully. "She's captured my heart completely." Caleb's hand found hers again, their fingers intertwining. "Not just hers," he said so quietly she almost didn't hear it. Madeline lifted her head to look at him, questioning. The tenderness in his eyes made her breath catch. "I never expected to feel this way again," he admitted. "I thought that part of me died with Sarah. But watching you with Emma, seeing your strength and kindness. Madeline, I think I'm falling in love with my wife." "Caleb," she whispered, unable to find more words. "You don't have to say anything," he assured her quickly. "I know this wasn't part of our arrangement. I wanted you to know that what began as convenience has become so much more to me." Madeline reached up to touch his face, her fingertips tracing the line of his jaw. "I've been afraid to admit it, even to myself," she confessed. "It felt disloyal somehow to Sarah's memory, to our original agreement. But I've fallen in love with this family, with Emma, and with you." The kiss that followed was gentle and tentative, a beginning rather than a culmination. When they parted, both were smiling, the shared vigil over their daughter having transformed their partnership into something neither had anticipated. In the months that followed, their relationship deepened and flourished. Caleb moved his things back into the main bedroom, and they began to truly build a life together as husband and wife. The townspeople, who had initially gossiped about their unconventional arrangement, now remarked on how natural they seemed together, as if they had always been a family. By Emma's first birthday, Madeline was expecting their second child. They celebrated with a small gathering in their home, which now bore touches of both Sarah's taste and Madeline's influence, a visible representation of their blended family. As Emma took her first tentative steps across the kitchen floor, launching herself from Madeline's hands to Caleb's waiting arms, they exchanged a look of pure joy. What had begun as an arrangement born of necessity had transformed into a love neither had been looking for, but both had desperately needed. "I never thought I'd be happy again," Caleb admitted that night as they lay together, his hand resting protectively over Madeline's still flat stomach. After Sarah died, it felt like the future had been erased. "And now?" Madeline asked, covering his hand with her own. "Now I know that life can surprise you," he said, kissing her softly. "That love can find you even when you're not looking for it." "It found all three of us," Madeline agreed, thinking of the sleeping child in the next room and the new life growing within her. A family forged from grief, but built on love. As the year turned toward winter again, their home stood warm and welcoming against the Montana cold, a sanctuary of second chances and unexpected joy in the wild frontier. What had begun as an act of kindness, a schoolteacher stepping in to help a grieving widower care for his newborn, had blossomed into a love story neither of them could have imagined, proof that even in the harshest landscapes, love could take root and flourish.